Canadian home sales ended on a high note this last year, with sales roaring back in October. And that has many economists and many real estate brokerages convinced that the housing market in 2025 is going to be a hot one. But at the same time, some markets in Canada are seeing realtors leave the industry completely. So just as things seem like they're getting better, realtors are leaving. And the question is why? And what's going to happen with the Canadian real estate market in 2025? And for this very special live stream, I'm bringing in one of the best kept secrets, at least in my opinion, in the real estate industry, Tyrell Boak, fresh off of his latest episode on the Tom Story Show, to talk about what's going on in the Canadian market and what we can expect going into 2025. So without further ado, welcome, Tyrell. How are you, my friend?
Good, Nolan. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Glad to have you. That was a hell of a show that you did on the Tom Story Show. You know, when you get on Tom's show with Steve there, that it's going to be a game changer, especially in the YouTube world. They only bring on the absolute best guests, and I was excited to see that you were on there and you were talking. What were you talking about primarily there? You're talking about FOMO in the Canadian housing market. Tell me a little bit about how that conversation went.
Yeah, we were talking about buyers having FOMO in this market. Back in the peak of the market, 2022, buyers had FOMO because there was not a lot of inventory available to them. So if they found something that was close to what they were looking for, they bought that property because they were afraid they would miss out on actually buying something. Fast forward 2 years later, and we've got a lot more inventory than we had in 2022. And buyers have the FOMO in that they're going to miss out on a different listing that might suit their needs a little better. So we're finding that they've got analysis paralysis, where they're just digging into it too much and they're trying to find that perfect property instead of something that matches their needs and suits what they're looking for today.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that rates are coming down. They don't know if they should be waiting for them to come down to buy, or if they should be buying now when homes are cheap. We can talk a little bit later on about specifically the strategies you can use around getting a mortgage today and buying at cheaper prices. But I really do believe that you're right with respect to FOMO. And I mean, you're in one of the coolest real estate markets out there. You're in the Kelowna area. Really cool vibe in that city. Lots of people who move there for retirement, lots of people that move there to be in a cool tech-oriented environment as well. I don't think a lot of people realize just how much tech is being built in that community, and also health services. So it's really like this evolving community. And I think in a lot of ways it's becoming ground zero for what's happening in the Canadian real estate market. And I'm curious, from your perspective, are you seeing this sort of FOMO in the Kelowna market right now?
Yeah, we still are. I'm working with a couple of buyers that, we've looked at a lot of properties and they're all great properties, but they're looking at, okay, what's coming on the market tomorrow, what's coming on next week, and wondering if maybe there's a better option for them. Meanwhile, while that's going on, the market's starting to pick up and their choices are getting to be less and less, whether they realize it or not. And we're in this window of opportunity right now where there is an abundance of inventory. Prices are a little bit suppressed, but like you mentioned in the intro, if we think prices are going to start going up later into the spring, they might miss that window of opportunity to get into the right property for them while they have a lot of choices.
Yeah, for sure. And that interest rate thing that we'll talk about at the end, it really isn't it shouldn't be a stop to somebody buying and getting the deals that they can get right now if they have the right mortgage strategy and whatnot in place. Now, a lot of your buyers now are coming off of your YouTube channel, which, by the way, is absolutely amazing. I think it's the #1 resource for buyers in Kelowna right now. I think what you've done is a really cool job out there of educating buyers on what's going on in the market. You did a couple of videos with respect to landlords and how things are changing in the BC rental market, as well as how things are changing for landlords. How's that YouTube channel changed how you're attracting clients, and what are you seeing with the clients that are coming in now once they've been a little bit more educated on what's going on in the market?
I think, yeah, thanks. When people are coming in from the YouTube channel, they have an understanding already of what's going on currently in the market and things that are changing and the opportunities that are available to them. And being an educated consumer makes the entire process go smoother for everyone. I'm here to act as their guide through the real estate transaction and help them navigate the real estate market. But having someone who's in tune with what's going on and who has gone out to educate themselves on how real estate works works to their benefit because it becomes a collaborative effort. They can rely on me for my expertise, but knowing that they have that understanding of what's going on as well really helps through the transaction and makes it a good experience for them.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really interesting. Like, I've run a real estate company. I'm not a realtor. My dad was a realtor. I run a mortgage company. We see contracts all the time. We know how they work. A lot of the times, unfortunately, we're educating real estate agents that don't know how the contracts work on how they actually work. But even knowing all of that stuff and even seeing what's going on in the world with respect to people wanting to sell a home by themselves or buy a home by themselves and not use an agent, even as somebody who's got experience in the industry, I think you're absolutely crazy to not use a real estate agent and not use somebody who's got, 50, 100, 1,000 reps on doing real estate deals, as opposed to doing the biggest financial transaction you'll ever do in your life and trying to do it by yourself. And I'll tell you one thing, people think that, oh, that's what the lawyer's for, is to make the contracts enforceable. We're seeing lawyers now that are charging realtor fees to do for sale by owners because of the added amount of work that goes into educating them on how to actually do the transaction and get the contracts enforceable. So I think it's really cool what you're doing with your YouTube channel. I think it's a great resource for people, not just in Kelowna, but all over BC. And I think especially in times like this where there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And let's talk about the uncertainty in the market, because right now we're seeing all kinds of weird data. We saw October sales surge by 30% across Canada. We're seeing realtors, while sales are surging, leaving the industry. And we're seeing
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of forecasts from different economists and different real estate companies suggesting that 2025, with rates going down, is going to be the year to buy a house. And I want to dig into this and take a look at some of the news articles here. And I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to get you to provide a little bit of your commentary so that people don't have to listen to just what Nolan has to say. But I want to go through and I want to talk about what's going on in the news right now, in the news cycle, and what we can really convey from that with respect to making a home buying decision versus maybe choosing to rent for another year or something like that. So, let's start with the Globe and Mail article here. Realtor numbers drop at Canada's largest real estate board. And we're seeing this across not just the Toronto Real Estate Board, but across many, many real estate boards across Canada. We're seeing, as the market gets tougher, as there's less certainty, people leaving this industry that 3 or 4 years ago was basically a blank check. All you had to do is get a real estate license and your phone would ring off the hook, to now not being able to afford the fees and everything else, because when a market gets the way it is right now, the really good realtors continue to do well, but the ones who don't have the experience or don't have the business acumen, they tend to start to fail. And one thing that I think is really interesting about this whole conversation is that the realtors that are leaving the industry, they literally got a license and their phone rang off the hook in 2021 and 2022. People blame realtors all the time. They're like, you made the market so expensive, you pushed the FOMO. Here's the reality. And for the people watching here, here's the reality of what happened in 2021 and 2022. This had nothing to do with realtors pushing the market and pushing up prices. They weren't out there pushing the market. They didn't have to, because literally their phones were ringing off the hook. It was the consumers, and I would say to a certain extent the media cycle, but it was very much the consumers who found out that the market was crazy, and it was them that pushed the market up. All the realtors did was facilitate the transactions. And when you've got somebody who is adamant about purchasing a home and willing to pay whatever it takes to buy that home because the market's in a frenzy, the realtor's just there to facilitate the transaction and do their best to make sure that that client doesn't make any big mistakes. And I said this in 2021, 2022 on my channels. I said, don't buy in a crazy market, because inevitably after a crazy market, there's always a slowdown. Prices come back, maybe not down to where they were before, but they come back down to the normal historical trend typically. And that's exactly what they did. So with respect to realtors leaving the industry, are you guys seeing this in your market?
We are, but I think at a slower pace than Ontario. And I think one of the reasons why is our licensing cycle in British Columbia is a 2-year cycle. So when you get your license, you have it for 2 years unless you give it up. But what I'm seeing is the office isn't as busy. We're having, more and more realtors are out. Maybe they're still licensed, but they're not actively participating, and they're just letting that license expire. But I do see a lot more leaving now than did in 2023 even. And if you think a lot of those were licensed in the peak of the market, 2021, 2022, that would make sense that now they're going to be 2 years into that licensing cycle. And they may be looking at, like you mentioned, the expenses, and they might not renew that license for next year when it does come up for expiry. So I think we're going to see that number of agents leaving the industry start to grow out here in British Columbia.
Now, with respect to the best agents in the industry, their numbers are down, but nowhere close to down as much as the brand new agents and the ones that are struggling. And I think that is really a testament to a great agent does a really great job, and most of their business ends up eventually coming from referrals and repeat clients.
Yeah.
And that really, when people are choosing their real estate agents, is what they need to look out for. Somebody who's willing to protect them, somebody who does a good job, looks out for their best interest. And if they find that, that's going to be one of those successful realtors who sticks in the industry, because they're going to continually have the clients coming in that will still continue to use them and still allows them to put food on their table. Now, unfortunately, the circumstances change. It's not everyone's going out to buy an Airbnb or buy a second home or buy a McMansion. Now there's people who are finding that they have lifestyle changes. Maybe their commutes are too long. Maybe they have kids that are leaving the nest. Maybe they have new kids. Maybe they just got into a relationship and, they don't want to live in the bachelor pad where the guy slept with all the previous women and it's time to get a new place. So it's more about lifestyle changes now with respect to what's happening in the real estate market, as opposed to just crazy, I need to buy a home because if I don't, I'll never be able to. And I think that's really going to be the tail of the tape for 2025. It's not going to be about another crazy market. It's going to be about what lifestyle changes have happened in the last couple of years and where does that lead us with respect to transactions. And I think we're already starting to see that. So when we look at this most recent article from CBC News, Canadian home sales rose 30% in October from a year ago. Greater Toronto Area, BC's Lower Mainland recorded double-digit increases. Now, here's the thing. Those two markets were the hardest hit. And you talked about, Kelowna market being different than the Toronto market. These two markets were the two that had the most froth in them, and they were the two that were the hardest hit. Kelowna's market got hit relatively hard, but places like just across the mountains, Calgary and Edmonton, have continued to perform well. And that's the one thing about these national news articles that you don't see, is they talk about realtors leaving en masse, Canadian home sales rose 30%, or housing prices dropped 20% in the Toronto market in 2020, 2023, 2024. But what you don't see is what's happening in the local markets. And I think it's important when somebody's making a buying decision to understand that Kelowna is different from Vancouver, and Vancouver is different from Toronto. Toronto is different from Montreal. Montreal is different from Halifax and Moncton, and Calgary and Edmonton are different from everywhere else as well. So really, when you're starting to make this decision to buy a home, it's really about two things. It's about what's actually happening in your local market, and it's about, are you in a position where now is the right time for you to buy a home and buy a home safely? So, when we look at these numbers, you start to see interest rates coming down. People are feeling a little bit more comfortable that they aren't going to be ending up buying a house in an environment where interest rates are going up a ton and prices are coming down. And this increase in sales is definitely a support mechanism for housing prices and sales going into 2025. And when you take a look at RBC, which, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know about RBC's thought leadership, now forget the things I say about them with respect to their mortgage product and some of the downfalls of the biggest bank in Canada not having necessarily the best mortgage product. There are things that RBC does really, really well. We use them for our commercial banking. And with respect to economists in Canada, they by far, at least with respect to the major banks, in my opinion, have the best economic resources of anybody. And if you go to thoughtleadership.rbc.com, you can find all kinds of economic resources, and they're always phenomenal. In fact, one of my favorites is the affordability index that they run. Now, we're not going to look necessarily at the affordability index right now, but we are going to look at this recent report from today, December 5th, from Chief Economist Robert Hogue, and it talks about the Canadian housing market and it ending the fall on an upswing. And there's some really interesting data here. So again, to the point that we just made with respect to talking about individual markets, if you take a look at the individual markets across Canada, you can see cities like Calgary, which have outperformed the rest of the market over the last little while, are actually not performing as well as other points in the market, especially that city 3 hours to the north, which is substantially colder. And I don't know what the opposite of hell is, but that's what you get when the opposite of hell is Edmonton in the winter. I'll tell you that. It's definitely not hot. But you start to see the numbers are going up pretty substantially in Edmonton. That has a lot to do with the fact that housing prices are still a lot lower there than they are in Calgary. But Calgary's come off a bit. But we're starting to see places like Vancouver, Fraser Valley, Toronto, and Montreal start to pick up steam with respect to home sales again. And I mean, look at Montreal. Montreal's crazy. 47% increase in home sales over last year. That's absolutely wild. We've got Toronto up 40%. This is genuinely people returning to the market, and some of them deciding to do it while interest rates are on the way down, but also where they believe housing prices are probably at the bottom. Now, the thing is, you can't predict where housing prices are going to go. If you're trying to time the bottom of the market, there's almost 100% chance you're going to miss it. But we're definitely seeing that combination of what's going on with the Bank of Canada and housing prices is starting to find its sweet spot. And the question is, will this continue into 2025? So when you take a look at a chart like this, I mean, first of all, like what's going on in Kelowna relative to the rest of the country, and then what do you make of this going into a season of the year, the fall, which is typically doesn't have this type of activity?
Yeah, we mirrored the national numbers in that our sales in October were up 30% from the month before, in a time of year where typically sales start to taper off. Now, we were behind the pace of last year for most of 2024, but sales were up in November as well, 30% from what they were the previous November. So we're seeing this same trend. And if we look at pricing, even though we've been in a buyer's market in Kelowna for the majority of 2024, our prices have been relatively flat. And in fact, they've kind of trended upwards. We think that we hit the bottom prices of December 2023, and we're up a few percentage from that point, and they're still continuing to trend up, even though sales were down over the previous year. So if this trend continues, where more buyers are coming into the market as there's more confidence in the market with lowering interest rates, prices aren't going to come down here any more than they already have, and they're probably going to follow the national trend and inch up through the next part of 2025. We do feel that the spring market here is going to be just as active as it is nationally, if not more.
Yeah, for sure. And this is where you have to be really careful with data, because as much as home sales might be up by 40%, let's take a look at the Toronto numbers, because even though they're up 40% from last year, really what this is not a return to 2021, 2022. This is a return to normalcy. And I think when you look at some of the headlines, which we'll show you guys in a second, and you start to see the forecast with respect to next year, the headlines might indicate that we're going to head into another frenzy and we're going to see housing prices go crazy. But here's the reality. The reality is, even though we're up 40%, the Toronto housing market really just kind of returned back to a normal level that you would have expected in 2017, 2018, 2019, prior to the pandemic. And this is why I think it's so important that people take the onus on themselves to understand the market, understand what's really happening in their local market, and not go and make a decision to buy a home just because they feel like, oh, shoot, I have to get in now, but because it's the right time for them. And what we always tell people is, at the end of the day, whether you buy at the top of the market or the bottom of the market, 25 years from now, the top or the bottom is just a blip on the radar. When we stretch out home prices over a 25-year period, it's always the same story. Something that seems like massive increases and massive drops today, 25 years from now, is barely noticeable on the charts. So that's why it's so important that if you're buying, you really are thinking about, what is my time span? So I don't think anybody should be buying if they expect to only live in a house for 12 or 18 months, because statistically speaking, the property values probably aren't going to go up enough to make up for the costs of buying and selling, specifically the real estate commissions and the taxes. But if you're looking at a 5-10-year plan, getting in at the time that's right for you and not trying to time the market is usually the best plan. And if you understand that over the course of the long term, the top or the bottom really doesn't matter. What matters is that you buy something that's affordable. My friend Nav from the YouTube channel Grow with Nav, which is I think, one of the best YouTube channels in Canada for real estate now, and that's coming from the guy that has probably had the most views in the Canadian real estate space in history. I think Nav's channel is incredible, and he was talking about his rule of 35, which was never purchase a property for greater than 35% of your net income, not your gross income. And when people do mortgage qualifications, or companies do mortgage qualifications, they'll go up to 42, 45% of your gross income. He's saying 35% of your net income, which is a substantially lower amount that you would qualify for. And he also says that if you've got $25,000 in an emergency fund in addition to your down payment, then you can probably stretch that out to 40. But I think the point that he makes, and what I think is probably one of the most important points in Canadian real estate history, is you shouldn't be buying to your max purchase price, and you should be making sure that the house that you buy is affordable. And if you can do that, it does not matter whether you buy at the top or the bottom of the market. So let's move on here to Canadian real estate forecasts. So Canadian real estate, this is from Yahoo Finance, all kinds of articles on this today. Home prices expected to rise in all markets next year, according to Royal LePage. This is from a survey. Some interesting data here. And, you know, I don't think that they're necessarily wrong, but I don't necessarily think that home prices are going to go up across Canada next year. I just don't see every single market performing well, and I definitely don't see massive price gains. Now, here's the thing about economists, and this is what you have to understand. I'm educated as an economist. Every single time an economist makes a forecast, they make it based on the information that they have at the moment that they make the forecast. And the one thing in life that is a certainty is change. I guess there's death and taxes as well, but things change almost immediately after these forecasts are made. So we could see things happen in interest rates. We could see things happen in the global economy. We could see things happen with inflation that change this story next week, a month from now, 3 months from now, or 6 months from now. So it's really important that people don't rely on these forecasts in their buying decisions, but also understand that these forecasts are there to kind of give people a feel of where the market is right now, so that they can make the best decision for them at the time that they're making it. And to go a little bit further, we've got another article here, spring surge in real estate sales expected in Ontario and across Canada. And this article goes in and talks about sort of similar things, the market picking up in 2025. And here's the problem with all of this stuff is everyone that they're interviewing, and here's a really good graph on national home sales from 2021 to 2024. You can see things are kind of returning back to normal, even though you can't see 2018, 2019 on this chart. But when you look at this data, whether it's from Royal LePage, Remax, different real estate boards, you always have to consider where the data is coming from. And if it's coming from an organization that has a vested interest in seeing real estate increase, they're going to be a little bit rosier on their forecast. And if it's coming from an organization that has a vested interest in real estate falling, they're going to be a little bit more negative. And if it's coming from a place like RBC, well, it could be skewed to the positive, it could be skewed to the negative, but they've got less of a stake in the forecast than the real estate organizations have. So I think it's important not just to look at what's coming out of the news headlines with respect to the real estate boards and the real estate companies, but really looking at all the data that you can find across different markets, and also understand that it's all about your employment prospects. It's all about how much you can afford, and it's whether or not you have a backstop if you buy a property to make sure that you can keep it in the event of something like an illness or a job loss or something like that. And this is really what it comes down to is real estate in 2025 isn't about what you think is going to happen in the market. It's about what is your personal situation and how can you buy in the way that makes you the safest without giving up the opportunity of owning a home. Because Stats Canada has some really interesting data on this. At the age of retirement, if you owned a home, it's highly likely that you've got over $1 million net worth. But if you rented a home, the chances of you having a $10, $20, $30, $40,000 net worth are significantly reduced. And renters in general end up at retirement age, having nowhere close to the net worth that homeowners do. And that is not a trend that is going to change unless we see something change drastically in how home ownership works. So when you think about your clients, Tyrell, when you think about the people that you're helping, what's the advice? What are the 2 or 3 things that you would tell them with respect to purchasing a home in 2025 in order to keep themselves safe, do it strategically, and not find themselves in a situation where 3 years from now they're taking a $900,000 haircut like some people in Toronto have done, or worse, losing the home because they couldn't afford it?
Yeah, I think I kind of echo what you have to say. Is I always tell my people, like, you can't time the market, obviously. Time in the market is always more important than timing the market. So I tell them that, the right time to buy a home is when they find the home that suits their needs now, or if they're, having kids or something in the next couple of years to suit those needs, and the house that they can afford. Nobody wants to be house poor. And I always encourage them to wait to buy a home till you're going to be there 5 to 10 years. There's always the chance that some life event happens and they have to get out of that home, but that's very rare to happen. And it's all about affordability. And I think that that's echoed in a lot of, especially the first time buyers that I work with. Most of them don't care so much as what the trends of the housing prices are, where the interest rates are. They want to know, how much is my monthly payment going to be? How much can I afford, so that I have the certainty and the security of knowing I can make that payment and I have a roof over my head.
Amazing. And I think that is probably some of the best advice that you will get in the Canadian real estate industry. That's why I love Tyrell. I love his YouTube channel. And I love that he approaches things in a way that's not the greasy long hair salesman that you would expect from some of the real estate industry. It's really, he's providing amazing information. He is talking about how to buy a home, buy it strategically, and do it without a ton of risk. And yes, I'm going to tell you right now, when you watch YouTube, the titles, the thumbnails, a lot of them are the world's coming to an end. In fact, this video's title and thumbnail will probably have some sort of that theme to it. But it's guys like Tyrell who are using the fear and the potential regrets that people are going to have buying a home, and the fact that that's where a lot of minds are in Canada. And he's using that to get them to click on the videos so that they watch the video and can get a real education on what's happening and understand what is actually going on, which is what's helping so many Canadians. And I love that Tyrell is doing this. Now, earlier in the video, we talked about the fact that we're going to talk about interest rate strategy. I'm going to tell you right now that a lot of people are taking variable rates because they think interest rates are certainly going to go down. And if you can withstand the risk, that is definitely a strategy to take. That being said, there's no guarantee that interest rates are going to go down. It looks like they're going to go down at least a bit in the next little while, but let's say they don't. How do you protect yourself? So let's say you're not the type of person who wants to go to the casino and put everything on black and choose a variable rate because you think that interest rates are going to go down, and you don't have the what do they call that in investing? The risk aversion,
The
or you don't have
tolerance.
the risk tolerance, thanks, Terrell, to actually go and do that. Well, there's a couple of things you can do. So first strategy is just take a variable rate and let it ride. That's cool for some people. Other strategies are to take a shorter term mortgage. We always say take the lowest rate you can get at the time that you get the mortgage. As of filming this, that is typically a 3 and often a 4-year mortgage, which is a really good strategy. Or you could take a 5-year mortgage and not pay much more. But here is the kicker. Here's what's really important. If you're going to get a fixed rate mortgage in Canada, you want to have it set up so that it is a mortgage that if interest rates do go down by another % or 2%, you've got the option to pay a penalty and switch to a lower interest rate. And I'll tell you, there's one type of borrower, 2 types of borrowers, let's say, that can't do that. It's the type of borrower who goes out and gets a mortgage at a big bank thinking that they have all the bells and whistles. They don't. I call banks B lenders because their mortgage products aren't as good as the mortgage products at lenders like First National, MCAP, CMLS. Those are the types of lenders that they have better products because they have to. If they didn't, they wouldn't be able to compete because they don't have the brand names and the trust that companies like RBC and Scotiabank and BMO and TD and CIBC have. So they end up having better products. And the one key feature of most of those products is that they have the ability to pay the penalty, switch to a different lender, and it's all about how the payout penalty calculations are done. Instead of having a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 penalty, you'll often have a $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 penalty, which a lot of times you can just lump back into the new mortgage, which is what allows you to move from one lender to another to get a better deal. The other type of borrower that we can't help is the people who go online, search for lowest rate Canada, choose the lowest rate, and just like everything else in life, what you pay for. When you get the lowest rate, you're getting an inferior mortgage. Quite often they have restrictions on being able to switch to a different lender, which means you're stuck with the lender you have. And if rates get better, you've lost all your negotiating power. They basically got you bent over the barrel. And in 2021, I'll tell you right now, there was two people that we couldn't help. It was the people who had a fixed rate mortgage at a big bank, and it was the people who had a fixed rate mortgage that was a discount mortgage. And by the way, a lot of lenders have full featured products and they have discount products. We always use the full featured products. When clients understand, when consumers understand, when borrowers understand the difference between a full featured and a discount mortgage and the opportunities it provides, especially in an environment where interest rates are going down, they almost always choose the slightly higher interest rate, the 0.1 or the 0.2% higher, which by the way, for most people, it's a cup of coffee a week. If you're in Toronto, it's a Starbucks. If you're in a place like Calgary or Edmonton, it's probably a Tim Hortons. And they'll choose that mortgage knowing they're going to pay a little bit more, but they're going to be able to get the opportunity somewhere down the road to probably make a big swing at saving some money. And any broker, anybody can save you 0.1, 0.2%. Most of the banks will give you $3,000 cash back and 1,000 points for toasters or airline points. And those things are not what ends up saving people money. What saves people money is having the ability to get a lower rate and take a $50,000, $70,000, $80,000 swing because they were able to get a lower rate on their mortgage. So if I were in the position where I needed to buy a property right now or leading into 2025, I'd be taking advantage of the market before things get any crazier than they are right now. I would be trying to buy before there's a whole bunch of competition for houses, like it seems like there's going to be in the spring. And I'd be getting a mortgage that has the flexibility, whether it's an adjustable or a fixed rate mortgage with a low penalty from a non-bank lender, so that if interest rates do go down, I can get the deal on the house right now, save some money there, and down the road, switch out my mortgage so I can save some money on the mortgage at that point as well. And that's really it. Like it all comes down to strategy. Any broker, any bank, any realtor can facilitate a transaction. Who you choose for your realtor, who you choose for your mortgage broker, who you choose to help you throughout this process. And let's call a spade a spade. We're all buying a home here. Nobody wants the realtor. Nobody wants the mortgage broker. But at the end of the day, the realtor, the mortgage broker you choose can be hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 25 years. So I think it's really important that guys like Tyrell exist and they get the attention that they deserve. I think what he's doing with YouTube is absolutely amazing, putting himself out there and getting a lot of great education out there. And Tyrell, on that note, any closing thoughts on your end?
No, I think you've summed it up really nicely. Thanks for the kind words. It's guys like you, reasons why I send all of my clients to a broker, because I want to make sure that they're not only getting the best guidance and advice from me, but when it comes to the financing side too, they need to have that proper guidance.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, great episode. Thanks, Tyrell, for coming on.
Thanks,
Links
Nolan.
to Tyrell's channel will be in the description below, and we'll see you guys on the next, not video, but live. And by the way, if you want to check out more on what's going on in the Canadian real estate market, make sure you check out this video right here.